Bob Dylan has often been called the voice of a generation, writing powerful protest anthems that capture the spirit of the age. These 5 Dylan tracks definitely try to tell stories of real-life tragedy and draw fresh attention to them. Bob Dylan first performed the song Roll On John back in 1962. That version was a traditional folk song, which remained a footnote in Dylan's discography until 2012, when Roll On John re-emerged as the final track on the studio album Tempest. The updated version is about Beatles songwriter John Lennon, whose murder in New York on December 5, 1980 shocked the world. Dylan's lyrical tribute says Lennon burned so bright during his life. The Beatles were hugely inspired by Dylan's work. Lennon in particular turned toward more Dylan-esque songwriting with introspective acoustic songs like You've Got to Hide Your Love Away and the full-on folk song Norwegian Wood, or at least a folk rock song. But Bob Dylan and Lennon had a complicated relationship. They first met in August 1964 when Dylan reportedly introduced the Beatles to cannabis. They met just a handful of times after that, and their encounters were generally too awkward to be considered a true friendship. After the Beatles broke up in 1970, Lennon took to disparaging Dylan's music. Even so, with Roll On John, Dylan pays tribute to Lennon as a mythic figure, a folk hero of the rock and roll age. Dylan's 1964 sophomore album, The Times They Are A-Changin', showcased Dylan's extraordinary songwriting talent and understanding of the American political landscape. The album contains the song Only a Pawn in Their Game, about the murder of civil rights activist Medgar Evers, who was shot and killed by white supremacist Byron de la Beckwith on June 12, 1963.
Medgar drove up, stepped out of his car, and this is when Byron de la Beckwith took aim and shot Medgar in the back.
Although there was a wealth of evidence against Beckwith, it took 3 trials before a jury finally convicted him, 31 years after he fired the fatal shots. In the song, Dylan places the murder and de la Beckwith's role in it within the context of the systemic racism of the Jim Crow era, writing that de la Beckwith was only a pawn in the game of a broader societal hatred. Dylan performed Only a Pawn in Their Game at Martin Luther King Jr.'s 1963 March on Washington, before King delivered his I Have a Dream speech. I looked up from the podium and I thought to myself, I've never seen such a large crowd. I was up close when King was giving that speech. To this day, it still affects me in a profound way. Among the very first songs written by Dylan was The Death of Emmett Till, a response to the 1955 torture and lynching of a 14-year-old black boy in Mississippi. The original studio recording existed only as a bootleg until its inclusion on the Bootleg Series Volume 9 in 2010. And isn't considered among the songwriter's best work. However, the song likely laid the groundwork for a later, more accomplished song, The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll, recorded for The Times They Are A-Changin'. In 1963, Hattie Carroll was a 51-year-old black woman and mother of 11. While working at Baltimore's Emerson Hotel, she was attacked by a drunk white guest named William Zantzinger. He was a 24-year-old tobacco farmer from a wealthy family and thought Carroll was too slow getting his drink. He hurled racist epithets at her and then struck her with his cane in the neck and shoulder area. Carroll collapsed shortly thereafter and was dead of a brain hemorrhage by the morning. Zantzinger was initially charged with murder, but the charges were reduced to manslaughter after the defense argued that Carroll's poor health was a factor in her death.
Well, we certainly want to give you a fair hearing in this courtroom. We don't want anything prejudicial to your client.
Dylan's lyrics are deeply ironic, stating that the judge pounded his gavel to show the court was on the level. Zantzinger was found guilty, but sentenced to just 6 months in prison for the killing. This is the one you probably know best. 1975's Hurricane rose to number 33 on the Billboard charts, making it one of the most commercially successful of Dylan's protest songs. Written in collaboration with Jacques Levy, Hurricane tells the story of Reuben Hurricane Carter, a gifted black boxer from Paterson, New Jersey, who spent 20 years in prison after being found guilty of a 1966 shooting at the Lafayette Bar and Grill. 3 white men and 1 white woman were shot, 3 of them fatally. The basis for the prosecution's case was that the attack was racially motivated. Carter and his alleged accomplice, John Artis, were sentenced to life in prison. In 1974, Carter released his memoir, The 16th Round, written behind bars, in which he claimed to be the innocent victim of a racist judicial system. Dylan read the book and went to meet Carter in prison. He became one of Carter's most outspoken advocates, organizing 2 Night of the Hurricane concerts to rally support. Dylan's feelings about the Carter tragedy are expressed in his lyrics, which said Carter could have been a champion, but became the man the authorities came to blame for something he never did.
My every day in prison was one of fighting against the entire prison system.
After 2 retrials, Carter finally regained his freedom in 1985. He went on to found Innocence International in 2004 to campaign on behalf of the wrongfully accused and died of cancer in 2014. Dylan was just hitting the big time when President John F. Kennedy was assassinated on November 22, 1963. Kennedy's death rocked the American people, but surprisingly, it took Dylan more than 50 years to address the killing. Murder Most Foul is a 17-minute epic released on Dylan's 2020 album Rough and Rowdy Ways. Dylan's lyrics reflect the enduring questions about JFK's murder, calling it the greatest magic trick ever under the sun. Released at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, Murder Most Foul has been lauded as a timely portrayal of how society at large processes traumatic events. And like any great song, it remains relevant to this day.